Welcome to the playthrough of my game. It's a simple game, it's just simply called Space Game. It's a couple of levels, it should take about 2 minutes to go through. Let's press play and respawn into the first level. The game follows a spaceman who is lost in space. The objective of the game is to just navigate your way through, find these small keys and leave the end portal. The character should be able to shoot, and there will be enemies later on that you will have to defeat. Just navigate these levels, bouncing up and down these various pads, find the collectible keys, and then make your way to the end of the level. This is an enemy. The character should interact with the enemy, should be able to shoot them and take damage from them. There's various traps and hidden areas through the level that you will find will contain a key. For instance, here is a key. You bounce up and continue on. And that's the end of the playthrough of the game. This is the final menu. This is the quick game option. This piece of code here details everything that is used in the main menu of the game. For instance, this first function here is for the play button. This function is attached to a button that is set into the game. When the button is pressed, it loads the very first level. This piece of code here sends to the console showing that the button has been pressed. This is used for debug options so that we know the button has actually been pressed when it's clicked. The other function here is used for the quit button. If this button is pressed, it will quit the application. This only works in a built version of the game because it would close Unity if you were editing. This also sends to the console if the button is pressed. This code is placed in any object in the game that is a pickup. For instance, the keys shown in the demo. This line here is used to interact with the sprite renderer found in the Unity engine. This function is used on any of the objects that have the script. If they collide with anything with the tag player, then they are destroyed and should be used as a collectible. This will eventually be used to allow them to be used as a key. This piece of code deals with the health bar for the player. The values are initialized here, the player health, and the max health, which is set to 100. It is a float to allow a decimal. The public image health bar image is found in-game and relates to the player's health bar. The fill value can be changed depending on how much damage the player has taken. This function calculates the damage that has been taken. It is weighed against the player health and the amount of damage. This creates a percentage measured against the maximum health, and then it is sent to the health bar image, which fills to the certain amount to represent the in-game health. This code here deals with anything relating to the enemy, their movement, and shooting. The variables initialized here deal with the speed of movement, how far away from the player they must be before they stop, the actual distance measured to the player, the time between the shooting when the game is first run, and then the time between the individual shots. Some of the code here, for instance this, is the fire point. This is a game object attached to the player where the bullets will be spawned from. The game object called here is a prefab created to be the bullet or fireball that the enemies will be shooting. The code here finds the player. This just checks for the player tag attached to any of the objects. The update function here is used to see if the player is close to the enemy. If they are over a certain distance away, then the enemy character moves towards the player. If they are less than this distance away, the enemy character retreats to a distance to allow them to shoot at the player. The time between shots is shown here. This spawns a bullet through an instance. They're using the bullet prefab. The bullet is then created at the fire point position. A small piece of code at the end deals with the time between the shots. If this value is positive, then the enemy character will shoot, spawning a bullet in an instance at the character's fire point. The bullet is shot, and then there is a time between the different shots which is set here. If the value is negative, the character will not shoot. This script here is attached to the player and is used to create their weapon. This connects to the fire point, which is a game object from where the bullets will be fired. It calls the bullet from the prefab library. If the button fire 1 is pressed, which in this instance is the button F, then it calls the shooting function. The shooting function spawns a bullet in an instance from the prefab library at the fire point and then moves along at a variable called in the other piece of code. This code here is attached to the bullet in the prefab library. This gives the bullet a speed and attaches to its rigid body. The rigid body's velocity in the direction of the right multiplied by the speed allows the bullet to move. This function here checks that the bullet is colliding with anything, and when it does, will do damage or will destroy the bullet's prefab so that it doesn't clutter the scene. This will eventually allow the bullets to do damage to the player and to the enemies, depending on who the code is attached to. This code here is attached to the end level object in game. It is used as a trigger and checks the colliders. If the player collider attaches to anything with this script, then the next level, level 2, is loaded from the library and the scene manager. This debug line is used to send to the console showing that the player has collided correctly with this object and that the level will end. This large piece of code here is the player control. Anything relating to the player's movement and jumping is placed in this piece of code. Starting here, this value checks if the player is moving. This one checks if the player is jumping. This line here sets the player's movement speed to 10 and their jump velocity here to 100. This public bool variable is grounded, set to true initially. This is used later in the code to make sure the player is touching things with the ground tag. If the player is touching things with this tag, then they can only jump once. In the start function, various components are called from the Unity editor. These are the rigid body, the renderer, and the animator. This if statement here is used to direction the player. If the value is larger than 0, then flip is true, and it should be facing to the right. If the value is less than 0, then it is set to false, and the player will face to the left. This if statement here is used to check if the player is grounded. If the player character jumps, then the jump value is set to greater than 0, and then if is grounded is set to false because the player is not touching the ground. This code here, I am not entirely sure what this does. In the update function, we check to see if every frame the right key is being pressed. If the right key is being pressed, then the character will move in the direction right. There is also an if statement for pressing the left key. If this key is being pressed, when we check, the character will move to the left. This final function here deals with the collisions. If the player is colliding with anything with the tag ground, as discussed previously, we'll set is grounded to true, which will allow the player to jump. This if function here checks if the tag equals enemy. If the player is connected with anything with the tag enemy, then it will print to the console collided with enemy. This would allow us to add damage when connecting with an enemy. Some things I would have liked to add to the game is the proper function of the bullets. The bullets should be able to interact with enemies and do damage to them, and the enemies should be able to shoot back to the player doing damage. Unfortunately, at the time of recording, Unity has been rather temperamental, and the bullet function does not seem to be working. I'd also like to be able to get the health bar system to work and adequately show how much health the player has after fighting with an enemy.